Hello guys, this time we'll be talking about the most common concepts you must know to apply in the middle game and the end game. I divided the concepts into the three categories: dynamic, semi-dynamic and positional. And of course take notice that some of them can be more or less with more or the categories depending on the position on the board. But in the meantime I'll just show you all of the ideas on the examples and I hope you will like it. Let's get started. The first concept is the force tactical lines. Force tactical lines means that you need to calculate either checkmate, either winning the material, either the promoting of the pawn. At this position, white to play. First of all, we can see that we have the open file. On the open file, we have the major pieces. At the same time, we have a super active bishop. What does it mean? It means we had checkmate in 3. Queen sacrifices on the back rank, bishop must capture, rook recaptures, game over, checkmate. The second one is the forceful quiet moves. Take notice that powerful quiet moves and forceful quiet moves may be a little bit misleading, but in the meantime, I'll just show how it works. For example, at this position, if you take into account if black to play, black has the battery along the last rank, but if I throw the check, the king can escape. And take notice what would it be if I throw the check immediately. After rook check, the king escapes, and after some of the moves that I will not comment too much because we do not have that much time. As you can see, these are one of the best moves according to the engine. And take notice that even though black has some advantage, but it's probably impossible to convert the advantage into the win, as white has sufficient counterplay, right? Now, what happens if we couldn't make this move by white, and after rook check, it's going to be a checkmate? Pretty simple question, isn't it? And what would be the idea? The idea is the quiet move. The quiet move means that move without check and without capture. This move takes out this square for the king, cuts it off, and after knight h5, the game is practically over. After queen check, king step back, take notice that at this moment, rook check, and even if the pawn move forward, queen g8 1 checkmate is unstoppable. After g4, check, here checkmate. And therefore, at this moment, the position is completely winning because of the move that we have the knight take out this square, and this is the move with the powerful quiet moves category. Now the third one, creating the battery. At this moment, as we can see, the battery is the following: queen with the rook on the open file or the half open file, and the two rooks on the last rank. Of course, the same with the black, but now at this moment we cannot exploit it. Look about the diagonal from the black's perspective. The bishop is aiming at the attack next to the king on the pawn, and the knight is hanging. Therefore, two objects of the attack. Can we combine it with the battery? Yes, we can make a battery along the diagonal, and after queen f6, the queen checkmate in 1 is the threat. At the same time, we are threatening to capture the knight as the knight is not protected, and the best line is the following. Bishop captures to deflect some of the attacks, and after some of these exchanges, as in a moment you can see, the white position is slowly collapsed, and now at this moment you can see that practically speaking, it's very difficult to organize any counterplay as all of the pieces of white are completely shut down. Another one is the infiltration with the major pieces. Take notice that in the middle game, many times you need to infiltrate into the opponent's part of the board or into the half of the board. Otherwise, you will not be able to make the significant progress or to convert the advantage into the win. And now, we have the battery along the b file, and let's infiltrate into the opponent's camp. Rook b7. The idea is the following. We can either cut off the 7th rank because the king cannot get into the center, into the endgame phase. At the same time, we can just make two rooks on the 7th rank to cut off the king and make all of these attacks along the 7th rank. Therefore, black tries to make some counterplay. Of course, the other rook comes in. Take notice, now if the king gets closer, we capture the pawn because the pawn cannot recapture due to the pin along the 7th rank. And now at this moment, if black tries to organize counterplay, look what happens. Slowly but surely, we are breaking through. Now we just grabbed two of these pawns on the a5, c5. Take notice the pawn cannot capture the rook due to the pin. And now slowly, as you can see, even if white sacrificed the exchange, the position is winning because of the pawn phalanx. And now, as you can see, the position is collapsing because of the lack of counterplay from black. and white progresses with the pawns, and the position is completely winning for white. And now let's get into the infiltration of the minor pieces, because major pieces, it's pretty easy. But what about minor, you may ask? Look about this. Now we have 3 minor pieces versus 2 minor pieces. It looks like the position may last for many moves, because, for example, if all of the pawns will be exchanged and the pieces will be exchanged as well, king and knight against the king would be a draw. But at this moment, white makes this position collapsing for black pretty quickly, because they attack the pawn that is not protected by any other pawns, so-called weakness. They start with just the attacking the pawn. After that, they will be trying to make the conversion of the other pawns going into the promotion, and black decides to protect. Now, we are just breaking through. Take notice, after the capture, the pawn will be captured next because the bishop will be attacking it. You cannot protect it. After the bishop tries to get more activity, we are just cutting down the opponent's resources. Take notice, the king is not going to get into the action. And now, after some of the moves, take notice that white makes the position better and better and attacks another weakness. Take notice, black has the dark square and the weaknesses are on the light squares. Dark square bishop means that the light squares cannot be protected or attacked by this bishop, of course. Now, after the bishop attacks the pawn, no problem, we just protect it, and slowly we are just getting better and better with the pieces. And finally, the king is the fighting piece in the endgame as well. Therefore, we are bringing the king closer. And now, as you can see, the position collapsed completely. Black is completely lost. And now, look about this. White has 3 connected passed pawns. And that's why the position collapsed that quickly. What happens if we try to make the idea about improving minor pieces with the help of the outpost? It is very important idea in the endgame, especially in the endgame, because the outpost makes the piece impossible to chase by the pawn. And now at this moment we have the position that is pretty much showing it in a beautiful way. At this moment, the rook cuts off the king from the 7th rank. At the same time, bishop is attacking the pawn and via the x3 the knight, and the knights are coming pretty quickly right here. And of course, for you, if you'd like to point out, what are the outposts, these are the squares highlighted red. And now how we can make this position winning. First of all, knight f6. Knight f6 improving the position of the knight, but at the same time threatening checkmate in 1. Take notice that sometimes positional ideas can be or even should be connected with the tactical ideas. At this moment, it is the checkmate threat, or you can say checkmate patterns, and the threat is based on this pattern. Now, after knight captures, we recapture. Now, we just exchange the pair of knights. At the same time, the rook is threatening checkmate in 1. You cannot block it with the rooks, because the rooks will be captured on the 7th rank. And now if you try to stop it with the bishop, because the bishop gets more active, we just simply exchange the bishop and renew the threat. After the rook a8, because they want to exchange the rooks, otherwise the rook will not be threatening checkmate. After the capture, and now you can see bishop and knight against the rook is winning. It is because the rook cannot infiltrate into the opponent's camp, into our camp at this moment. And at the same time, we have the pawns that can make the pawn mass with the passed pawn, and at the same time we can make a breakthrough. Now, after f5 capture, now the rook gets into the 4th rank to try to capture the pawns. And now at this moment, look about another idea. Another idea is to cut off the rook from the action. At the same time, in a moment, the king gets right here. Of course, if black make another moves, they will be losing anyway. And now at this moment, as you can see, the position is completely winning. And now you may ask, what would happen if the play would be a little bit different? Let's check it out quickly. After the series of moves that we know already, what would happen if black decides to play rook g8 to give up some material and to try to make the counterplay along the g file? After bishop captures, rook step back, otherwise the checkmate next move. Rook captures, king captures, and now, as you can see, the position is pretty similar to the previous one and the same. At this moment, we are just attacking the weakness. The weakness is the pawn that is not protected by any other pawns. After that, we are just making a breakthrough with the pawns. And now, as you can see, now we have the passed pawn. And at the same time, this pawn will collapse, will be having two passed pawns, and black is not able to generate a counterplay because they do not have that much time. And now at this moment, the pawn is promoting into the queen. And now at this moment, of course, you see the position is winning easily. What happens if we try to see what would be the idea about restricting active moves of the opponent pieces with the pawns? Now, this is the drastical example, very extreme. I just did it on purpose, but at the same time, I would like to show you what happens if the pieces are very nicely out of play. At this moment, it is checkmate in 11. If you would like to try your skills in visualization and simple calculation, white to play and checkmate in 11. Of course, it's not about checkmate, it's about restricting, but at the same time, the moves are pretty simple to calculate and visualize. First, we are just cutting off all of the resources for black. Take notice, black bishop is unable to get out of this square highlighted red. At the same time, the rook cannot get out and the knight cannot get out as well. And of course, these pawns cannot move forward to free the pieces. And at the same time, the king is cut off right here. And therefore, the idea is the following. If the knight would land on f7, it's going to be the checkmate, as the king cannot get into the h7 square. And that's why h6 is just the idea not to allow this idea to be done at this position. And now we are just doing this anyway. Now, at this moment, take notice that the knight is cutting off the square g7 and attacking the pawn. The king gets closer to protect it. Now, rook is protected by the pawn, and we are attacking the pawn and capture in the meantime. Now, after the capture, now the checkmate pattern. The checkmate pattern is the following. Normally, the pawn forward, rook here, but if we just move pawn forward, the rook would be not protected. That's why we are just moving the rook out of the king's way. After the pawn forward, a beautiful checkmate. And that's why it is checkmate in 11. The idea was to restrict the active moves of the opponent's pieces with our pawns. As you can see, it was done in an excellent and perfect way. Now let's have a look what happens if we just want to use our pawns to chase or lock pieces with our pawns. And now at this moment you can see, oh, this is a pretty simple and nice looking middle game position. Probably it's even because there are not too many, let's say, ideas to see. But look about this pawn. The pawn is on a4. It seems a little bit innocent, but in a moment you will see why it is that much crucial. c3 is attacking the bishop. The bishop cannot get neither on the a3 or c5 square because it is controlled by our pieces or pawns, especially the pawns. After the bishop back up, now b4. Again, the pawn is protected by the other pawn, therefore the bishop needs to go. And now this pawn formation cuts off the bishop from the action. At the same time, the pawns on the 7th rank by black does not allow the bishop to retreat. And now at this moment, bishop sacrifices itself, trying to generate some counterplay. And now the best line according to the engine. Take notice, this is the move that now we need to get rid of this attack. After stepping back, we just exchange it. And now in a moment, look about this. Another active play by the pawns to activate all of the pieces at the same time. And now after this moment, you can see that we have another idea that we just briefly mentioned, the outpost. The outpost means that the pawn is protecting the piece and it cannot be chased away by the opponent's pawns. And now at this moment, the position is pretty simple winning because black cannot have a real counterplay and white is up a piece. Of course, in the meantime, the pawn is hanging and so on. Let's have a look at another idea that I really like because I just created the example that I probably think it may be one of the most amazing examples about the pawn break. At this moment, we'll be talking about destroying opponent's pawn structure with pawns. And now, as you can see, we have 3 pawns versus 3 pawns on the king side. But at the same time, look about the pieces that are behind the pawns. The pieces behind the pawns are lurking into the king's squares to checkmate the king. At the same time, the bishop, light square and dark square are attacking squares next to the king. And as you can see, both of these pieces on the G and H files, the major pieces, are trying to make a breakthrough. And now, how do we do it? First of all, we are just opening up the bishop and attacking 2 pieces at the same time. At this moment, 2 objects to be precise, because the pawn is not a piece, right? But after the capture, we just recapture with the pawn. And now we can say, what would be the idea behind it? The idea is the following. First of all, we exploited the fact that the knight cannot retreat on the safe spot because we can capture anyway. Therefore, as I just mentioned, some of these ideas should be connected. The more ideas you connect, the more powerful attacks and the more powerful play in general. Now, after h6, in order to try to the king to make some of the counterplay and try to release the pressure, we are just making f takes e7. And you can say, oh, now it's pretty much easy winning because two pieces are being attacked at the same time, the fork, right? Now, after f6, we can say, of course, now we are just capturing either here or there with check winning anyway, right? You are correct. In practical play, promoting the pawn and capturing the queen with check would be the best one, but according to the engine, it's not the best move. I know it sounds ridiculous, but this is the example that I would like to point out. Look about this. We have the bishops that are powerful, but we didn't open up the g file. What happens? g5. Yes, it's a way better than capturing the pawn with the queen. You can check it out by yourself, setting up the position and checking with the engine. Now, after the pawn capture, rook check, the infiltration into the position, and the best lines according to the engine. Now, as you can see, all of them with check. The king is forced to go into the back rank, after that into the 7th and checkmated. And now you may see that this position is complete disaster. Why is that? Because the opponent was not able to stop all of this counterplay and all of these attacks by the pawns, opening up the position completely. And you can see it was the position that was shredded by the pawns. And now let's have a look what would happen if we didn't play g5. After just capturing right here, as you probably think it's the best one, it's not the best one, because in a moment you can see how much counterplay is generated by the opponent. Of course, it's winning as well. I do not mean it's not, but take notice that we needed to have 3 to 4 moves more instead of the previous line that was crashing without any, let's say, counterplay. And now the last idea, this time the idea about fixing our pawn structure with the pieces or pawns. And now, as you can see from the Black's perspective, Black has 2 pawns on the c file. Many players are worried about it. Oh, because we are the double pawns, what can I say? Take notice, first of all, these double pawns are with the connection with the pawn on the d file. At the same time, take notice that we can try to generate the counterplay attacking the pawn in the center, and after that, if these pawns are gone, we can attack it one more time if they recapture either from the c or e file with the pawn. And therefore, c5, after the pawn protects, capture, capture, and again, after the pawn is captured, take notice, our pawn structure is perfect. Therefore, we do not have the pawn that was a little bit damaged by the double pawns, and everything seems perfect, right? And now let's have a look the other idea at this position. If white played a little bit different. If white decides to capture immediately, this would what happened. First of all, this is the pawn that is a little bit backward, but take notice we can always step back and play c5, or step to b6 and play c5 anyway, having the control with 2 pawns in the center and having these squares on the 4th rank controlled by the pawns, what is very powerful. And now at this moment, a little bit of improvement. And now after this move, the rook is being attacked by the bishop, of course. Therefore, pawn attacks the bishop. And now at this moment, white finished the development because they connected the rooks. And now we have this formation, as you can see, that is the perfect one, right? And therefore, don't worry if you have the pawns that are doubled, unless they are isolated. If this line would be open and no pawns on the d file, just the pawns on the c file and the end game, not the middle game, yes, it would be the reason to worry. And if it is the middle game, you have the pawn next to it and you can push the pawn and capture, and after that the other pawn goes to the same square as the previous one to capture and attack the center, mostly it's a pretty good idea.